I'll just go. That's fine. Thank you.
I'll do whatever you want.
I'll jump in.
Okay.
Is it all right to get started soon?
Yeah, 1 minute.
1 minute. Okay.
1 minute countdown. There might be a couple people coming. Still coming in. We're just finishing up downstairs, so.
Yeah.
It's the Zoom man. Okay. I'll go back and see if they're ready. And I will point.
Okay. I'm getting the thumbs up, so that tells me that we should get. Oh, now a kid is giving me a thumbs down. My name is Ryan Christensen. I'm on staff with the Iowa Conference. I was here for worship earlier, so it's good to see that some of you are back and some of you have moved. My mic, I hear my mic is not on. Test 1, 2. Test, is my voice on? Okay, it's the mic. We're troubleshooting this together. Test 1, 2. Test 1, 2. I can only count to 4, so this is a challenging thing. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2. Test 1, 2. This makes for great live online TV, right? Test 1, 2. All right, test 1, 2, 3. So I'm looking towards the back. Shall I keep going and speak loudly, or is there a plan B? I can fill the space. I've got 2 kids. I can pull out my... I will not pull out my father who's hiking with my kid's voice. So let's try this again. Welcome. My name is Ryan Christensen. I'm on staff with the Iowa Conference for the United Methodist Church, and I get to present your CAT results in a kind of a Q&A summary type fashion. My supervisor, Jay Johnson, was here a while back and presented like an in-depth 2-hour, I think it's like a 40-some page report to the leadership. It is not helpful just to pass those 40 pages around and just say, take a look. I know he wrote up a summary, and in your handout, if you're online, welcome. And if you want a handout, please contact the church office. But the handout, the first page, is that summary that my supervisor, Jay Johnson, put together. And then I have a few other charts that I just kind of copied over from the results. But it's good to be with you. This is the hard time, right? You just ate a great, 3 tables of food, like 1 whole table of desserts. So if the person next to you is falling asleep, elbow them, or I'll throw something at them. Let's start with prayer. Gracious God, thank you for the opportunity to come together today. Help us to gather with curiosity. Help us to open our hearts and our minds to your way. God, give us open ears, open eyes, open hearts. All this we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. So we'll just go through some quick slides. My intent is to keep the content pretty short, but allow lots of time for questions and conversation. And so let's hit a few of these slides pretty quickly. So I get paid a nickel, I think, every time I use the word CAT, Congregation Assessment Tool, CAT. It was the survey that you took. And go to the next slide. My name is Ryan Christensen. What I did for this is just took my Jay Johnson, who was here last time. I took his slides and shortened them, but I think he has like a whole roll of film with nothing but cats on them, so you're in for a treat with his slides. I'm part of the Iowa Conference. I have the best job in the world, that I really do get to travel, and we are on track this year to do about 50 of these cats, and they are great at either helping a church discern where God could be calling them, to get a clear sense of a current reality, or to think about some steps to get from here to there. So thank you for taking this in the time of discernment, and you're going to get a great snapshot of where you are today. Let's go on to the next one, and the next one. I just wanted you to see an extra picture of a cat. So this tool was put together by Holy Cow Consulting. I get another nickel every time I say cow. So cat and cow. And the tagline from this company for this instrument is, you can make better decisions in less time with more confidence. Right? What I would say is, it's impossible for any small group of people to truly discern and understand where the whole of the church is. In fact, in the work I get to do, it's often hard for a whole church to understand where it is, let alone coming through a pandemic, right? And so this is just a helpful tool to say, here's where we are today. Here are some great next steps that we can take. And it gives you something called organizational intelligence. If you go on to the next one, everybody who's been a part of the church, I think usually confirmation age or older, is able to take this. And my invitation to you today would be to be curious. So I have 2 kids, a 6-year-old and a 5-year-old, and occasionally we do these Facebook quizzes that tell us things like, which Disney princess are you? Anybody done that one? I know it says I'm Ariel, but I am not that Disney princess. I tell really bad jokes, so. All right. So the survey will often give you elements. The first quadrant is, the report will share something, and you already know that, and everybody's on the same page. The second part would be the report could share something, and you might be surprised. And surprise is a fun thing, and to come with that with curiosity. The fourth would be, there are times that there would be something by the report or what I share today that I don't know, and you would know. And that's a chance for you to talk about that and share that with each other and to explore that together. But the fourth quadrant is when I have fun, right? I'm the guy who talked about during the sermon that I love to go hiking. And I don't always know where I'm going, but I'm really good about exploring. And I trust that the Holy Spirit is with us in this time of faithful exploration, that maybe the report doesn't share, nor do we know why something is the way it is. And that's a holy opportunity. A couple more slides, and then I'll get into some of the meat of what you talked about. Let's go to the next one. So we'll see some stuff in the charts that you have will be a dot on a map. And that's not good or bad, I would say. But it's helpful. It's really helpful to know where you are. Like you go into a mall, and there's a star on a map. And it's not good or bad, but it's helpful, right? If you want to go to where JCPenney's used to be, it makes a difference if you're where the star is compared to Nordstrom's, right? You will take different steps depending on where you are. And what I would say this congregation assessment tool thing, is especially helpful in helping congregations see more clearly where they are today. It's not good or bad, but it's helpful. So then the next slide would indicate that your survey is, we not only learn how you people respond and what you say, your information is also benchmarked or compared to about 3,500 other churches that have taken this in the last 5 or 6 years. We've done enough that we have a sense of what the pandemic is doing to churches. And so two things that we'll just say, that every church has taken a bit of hit in terms of vitality. Every single church. I would also share that the pandemic is not changing a church's DNA, right? So if a church wanted, if worship was a big area of focus before the pandemic, in and through and after, that remains the same. What I have learned is a pandemic does not change a church's DNA. And that shocks me a bit, but it has held true. So we see not only what the folks in your church say, but also how it compares to the 3,500 other churches. And that tells us where you have unique areas of passion, where you have unique characteristics, your unique DNA. One more slide, and then we'll see if you've got any questions so far. And I'll try my best to hear and then repeat your question. So you'll recall you had about 100 questions. This is the longest survey that I've been a part of, but it's fantastic. It gives you a really good snapshot. And in many of these, you had the opportunity to select from strongly disagree all the way to strongly agree. And there are some times we have folks that answered things on the fence. And those are times when people selected strongly agree or strongly disagree. For so many of your answers, uniquely, you had folks who were on the fence. And there could be any number of reasons for that, and we'll look deeper here. There were a series of commercials that were out maybe a year or two ago, pre-pandemic time, right? Kind of a blur before that. And you'll recall one of these had a person in a hospital, a guy talking to a nurse, and he says, "How is Dr. Johnson?" And she says, "Well, he's okay." Do you remember this? And it goes back and forth, but if he was shocked that, and the tagline for these AT&T commercials is, "Just okay is not okay." So if the question you were asked is, God is at work in awesome ways here at Fairfield United Methodist Church, agree would be yes. Disagree would be no way. But on the fence, if somebody's asked, God is at work here, on the fence might indicate maybe. Or I don't know. I would say as somebody is looking to get connected or reconnected with a church, if somebody hears, how's the church? And they hear, I don't know, that's not going to connect with folks. So an opportunity through and through is to help people shift from being on the fence to being more passionate. Any questions? I've kind of talked about methodology, and this was to actually put you to sleep. No, I'm kidding. Bad jokes. Any questions so far? You had about 100 responses. I think I looked. You had 100 responses, and in Jay Johnson's page 1, that would be 83% of your pre-COVID-19 average worship attendance. So that gives us a sense that we have really good results and could have confidence, right? So I am thankful to everybody who worked it to help recruit folks. And I don't know, did you bribe people with anything? Cat stickers, root beer floats, Kit Kat candy bars? Maybe you should go back, and if you filled out the survey, we want a Kit Kat candy bar. And so there's a bit of information on the front about towards the top about who answered the survey. What we do know is even if everybody who's connected to the church, everybody else who didn't answer does, you have enough responses that it would only move the responses, the dots on the maps, 5 percentile points. If you're a math person, we can go into that more, but basically that tells us we have really good confidence that your numbers are accurate. Let's dive in. So satisfaction and energy, next slide. Satisfaction and energy, and maybe click again. One more time. Okay. So satisfaction and energy are two of the first three things I look at when I look at a survey's results. Satisfaction, church will score highly in satisfaction when they're clear on God's purpose and people feel we're living into that. Energy level is where people say we want to be a part of things. And so I look at that, and if we go to the next slide, that is where your church is compared to those 500 other churches, 5,000 churches that have taken this, 3,500 churches in the last 5 years. And you will see this on the insert here. So this is not the front page, but then flip one more page and it's on the back. So that this would just tell me that right about average, when compared to the 3,500 other churches, about average in terms of satisfaction. That means shalom or wholeness or goodness or peace, but lower energy. And we can look and see what could be leading to that. What we do know is the pandemic has bumped it down churches about 10 points. So you can move that arrow up and to the right about one tick on the graph. And that would be the difference that a pandemic is making. what do you think? Any reactions? Any feedback or surprise? I heard something low energy. Yeah, great point. So the statement was old people, low energy. And Holy Cow Consulting has done this enough that they would say that the age of a congregation does not correlate to any part of vitality. And I've been around enough Iowa United Methodist churches that we have some older by age vitality churches and some younger struggling churches. So there are probably other things that are leading to what brings you to that point. So, in fact, let me pull up my report. So we are able to compare your age to the 3,500 other churches. And compared to those other churches, your age is at the 58th percentile. So you're kind of right in the middle. Though I appreciate your energy may be low, having just eaten like 5 desserts and come to this presentation. Your age is kind of right in the middle, pretty average when all the churches we meet. So that's what this says. Yes. Yeah. Great question. So the question is this indicative of the larger population? So I would back up and just say these are benchmarked against those 3,500 other churches. So even in Iowa, it tends to be diagonal from bottom left all the way up to top right. And we see most of the churches kind of right in the middle. And that's just how benchmarking works. In Iowa, and I've been a part of doing about 85 of these in the last 3-4 years, we have churches all the way across the spectrum. What I do think is there are some things locally, culturally, that play off each other, right? So I was at a church a while back, and they were just really deep in conflict. And then they said, well, that's just kind of normal. And then they unpacked that the church had split because of a Walmart, right? Like, we want the Walmart, we don't want the Walmart. And that's in the community, and also some of the same patterns in the church. So the energy level is low, even compared to other United Methodist churches I see. Not the lowest, right? There are churches that I have seen in the very top corner that you have to kind of move that marker up in the bottom, up top right. And too often I have visited churches where their dot is bottom left under that marker. So does that answer your question? Sure. Yeah. This is benchmarked against 3,500 other churches in the United States. Yeah. Yeah. So, good. Yeah. So I would say if you've been around the church a while, that may have been a time of higher energy or higher satisfaction. You yourself may find yourself personally at a different place than this dot, but it's helpful to see when a church is there. It tells you that some next steps. And we'll highlight some next steps that you could take over the next year, 2 years, that could take you from where you are to top and right would be a place of higher vitality. Go ahead and click this slide again. So we see some common things in different areas, and the top right would be probably the church's best position to make disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. I use that's a pretty generic mission statement. I saw that you have your mission and vision, but churches in the upper right quadrant tend to have great flexibility, great worship. Leadership is adaptive, and people know how to become leaders and serve as leaders in those churches. There are a few other characteristics, but those are three of them. Transformational churches, chaotic, lots of energy, and then no clarity about what we're called to do. It would be like confirmation after everybody just drank a 12-pack of Mountain Dew, right? Those are wonderfully high energy, high conflict churches. Static, the bottom right, is actually the hardest place for a church to be because it's low energy, but very high satisfaction. And it could be where you are currently, right? You just had a great lunch, and you're like, I don't feel like moving. Some churches find themselves there, and it's really hard to get up and get moving. So all things considered, you're in a decent place where you could be spurned to say, we want to take a step together. And that would move you over the next little bit. Go ahead and click the slide again. To take movement over the next year or two, you'll go up and to the right. That would be the hope, right? Movement can happen. You'll come out of a pandemic and enjoy each other and figure out what life looks like after a pandemic.
Ryan, does it factor in that Pastor Al is relatively new with the church?
Great question. Does it factor in that Pastor Al is relatively new with the church? It would matter some. What we ask is that a church does not do this survey for at least 6 months. We wait, if there's been a pastoral change, at least 6 months for people to orient themselves to that new reality. So you waited at least that long to do this. Let's go on to the next slide, right? And well, the next one after this. And we'll get to, okay, keep moving. So it says page 5, and not really page 5. That would have been part of Jay's presentation in the thick packet. In your handout, and this is going to be page 1, so not the front page, but flip back 1, and it would say at the top, Fairfield Congregation Assessment Tool Q&A Supplement. Here we have the things that your church is focused on most. And what we know is that people in churches don't focus on a list of 100 things to say we are satisfied or we're energized, right? So most people are going to look at a pretty short list. I think about when I went car shopping. So I drive a conference car. I'm on the road enough. I want a good seat, great stereo, good gas mileage. My wife, we walked into a dealership not long ago, and she said, could I have something orange, yellow, or red? We were looking for different things, right? Temperature control is something we could agree on. So here on this page would be the things that people in your church focus on or expect most in a church. And so the question just a moment ago was, would it make a big difference with our pastor being new? So let's pay attention to what themes we see here. So I'm just going to read these and driver number 1. So this is the top thing that people think about or are most focused on in this church. Persons who serve as leaders in our church are representative of the membership. That's what people think about most. Number 2, in important decisions in our church, adequate opportunity for consideration of different approaches is usually provided. So I categorize these in my mind. Your top 2 areas of focus have to do with governance and leadership, right? And these drivers form over decades, if not generations. So, after I processed this with Jay Johnson, who was here with your leaders, they affirm that there's some truth to this. So the top 2 things that people think about here are leaders. And then when we get to number 3, you would see the word pastor. Our pastor articulates a clear vision for our church and keeps it before the people in a compelling way. Through preaching, through conversations, through writing, you would expect your pastor to help cultivate and cast a vision of where your church is called to go. But that's the third, right? The top 2, leadership, and the third is pastor. Number 4, problems between groups in our church are usually resolved through mutual effort. So when you navigate differences well, life is fun. When this church would struggle to let's say if the question is, hey, should we wear masks. And if that conversation was a big fight here, that would just sap energy and life, right? That would hit this congregation harder than most. Number 5, a friendly atmosphere prevails among members of our church. This would tell me that while every church that I visited says they're friendly, there's one church that said they weren't friendly. Every church I visit says they're friendly. When you are at your best, you will be a friendly, hospitable, positive church. Attitude is contagious here. Right, so I would note that nowhere in these top 5 are like Christian education or worship or things like that. And when you think about the church as a whole in this church, right, this is what you all are saying. You are most focused on leadership. The one that you have one driver of energy, and this would indicate to me that it's maybe more diverse of what people are looking at. You have one thing here, and it says, in important decisions in our church, adequate opportunity for consideration of different approaches is usually provided. So earlier when I said a pandemic is not changing a church's DNA, it's this page that this likely has been your DNA for quite a while, right? I have never been to Fairfield before today, let alone in this church. Chances are, if you've been around a while, you would know stories that helped shape, examples of events that helped shape the mind of people in this church. That places a lot of emphasis on leadership. Thoughts, questions, ideas? Yeah. Sure. The question is, am I defining vitality of the church by satisfaction and energy? And for this part, yes. Those would be indicators of when a church feels alive, when a church says, we are alive with what God has called us to do, and God is working through us in really awesome ways, we would see most often churches in the upper right section of that graph, high energy, high satisfaction, and probably a higher vitality would be the mix of those. And so the church, you have so many folks on the fence when it comes to leadership. And the top one here, persons who serve as leaders in our church are representative of the membership. When asked questions about this one in particular, there was often so many folks on the fence that said, well, maybe not. So that would be one of the things that could happen to take a step just to have greater two-way conversation. We'll get to some of that. I just kind of rambled, and we had a question over here, too. Yeah.
So these drivers were chosen to have high degree of focus because so many people were on the fence?
Good question. Yeah, so on the right side of this list, there would have been 3 opportunities: moderate, high, or very high. And by the way, how people answer the questions, it's going to be mathematically a tighter correlation. So if the answer here was very high, we could have said that everybody in the church put these as the highest things that they think about. By degree of focus being high, we would say most everybody was thinking most about these. And moderate would say probably more than half of the folks were thinking about these. This list is not saying whether or not they're happening or whether or not people are on the fence. This list tells us where people are focused most. So when these are happening well, your church would be high energy, high satisfaction, if that makes sense. This is the checklist. When people are saying, I'm really excited about our church, these things would be happening well, right? And this list isn't good or bad. Like, it's not good or bad that y'all think a lot about leadership, but it's super helpful to know. Does that answer your question a bit? What I would say is when thinking about these things in particular, you had a lot of folks on the fence, right? So let's take the first one. When I will look this question up in particular.
Well, because I know that, well, a lot of people, I agree or I would disagree.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't have to,
Yes, we can unpack this in much greater depth. Correlation, right? So math people, the list here are going to be the places of highest correlation between people's answers and responses and when they selected satisfaction and energy. These are the highest areas of correlation. In particular, what's the top driver here? Persons who serve as leaders in our church. Okay. In particular, so you had 100 people fill this out. Persons who serve as leaders in our church are representative of the membership. That's your top driver. I'm just going to double check. Yes. So between, you had people who selected strongly agree would be 7 people, agree 39 people. On the fence, when asked persons who serve as leaders in our church, you have, I'm doing quick math, 44% of the folks are on the fence, right? And then when answering no, or which would be strongly disagree or disagree, 10 people would have answered that way. So you've got the full spectrum. And you've got, 45% of the folks who would answer the question or feel that our church does a good job of representing the membership. You've got another 40-some% that are on the fence, right? So that's does that get a little bit? Question over here. Yeah. 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 Yep. Yeah, so it's degree of focus. So if the statement here was very high, you can imagine light beams, so very high would say that your church has a laser-like focus. When it says high, imagine up here, like a laser-like focus would be boom, and that and only that. And I visit some churches where they have a laser focus on worship, which would tell me that everybody in that church thinks worship is a big deal. If worship's going well, fantastic. If the worship is not going well, hold on to your hats, folks, because people are going to be grumpy and calling, I don't know who you'd call, but so yours says the degree of focus is high, which instead of a laser focus, it's going to be like a spotlight. Fewer people, a bit less focused on this. But still, most folks in this church, when they think about the church, are going to think most about leadership. Right? That's what this page would tell me. When people are thinking about this church, when they're excited or frustrated, when they talk with their friends, when they go out for coffee, leadership first and foremost. Correct. Yeah, it would be unified in what you're looking at. So let's say we are thinking about the weather outside. Are we unified that I haven't been out. Like, if it's raining, then I will have an umbrella, right? So we're focused on the weather. I'm going to chase that analogy, and it's not going to be helpful, but this is where people are unified in their expectations, right? So as leaders in the church, you could say, well, what do we work on? Where do we focus? And this would tell us the biggest lever in this church is often around leadership, right? So in terms of pandemic, let me take a step back. I would say in some churches, the weight of the pandemic has fallen on the shoulders of the pastor. That's their DNA. And the pastor is listed out of this 5, one time. I would say the top 2 here are leadership, right? So I could imagine that the weight of making any number of the thousands of decisions that you all have been faced with over the last several months, in this church, who would feel the weight most? Leadership. Thoughts, questions, ideas? Great questions. I appreciate your good questions. Let's go to the next slide. Well, okay. And the slide after that. And just keep going through these. Yeah, Pastor Al. Sure. Pastor Al's question is, what is the significance of only having one driver of energy? Whereas you have greater agreement about what would give you satisfaction, or when people are satisfied, they're going to say, yes, we're doing what God has called us to do. You have greater diversity in your congregation. You have greater diversity about what would energize folks, right? So for some folks, it would be getting energized maybe by worship, others by education, others by leadership or conflict. It's more widespread. You have less agreement. And this isn't good or bad, but you don't have as big of a lever when it comes to energizing people. And still, your one driver of energy goes back to leadership. So chances are in this church to start with unpacking some things around leadership would both drive up satisfaction and drive up energy. I heard somebody turn on, it sounded like the Cubs game. You're pulling up the Cubs game? I'm kidding. Bad jokes. Yes, yeah, a question or a comment.
I guess I need to go back because I truly don't understand why our church, this is saying our church is unified under leadership instead of maybe our pastor or what's happening in worship. I mean, why?
Yeah.
Why are we saying leadership instead of our worship? I don't understand how these answers came to be.
Sure, and
Maybe you address it, it's just not computing, I don't know.
computing. So if you're a math person, it would be these have the highest degree of correlation with your satisfaction and energy. But backing up, when people are saying we are energized, or we feel our church is vital, when you're answering those questions, these are the things that the computer tracks that people in this church are correlating or connecting most with feeling energized or not, or feeling satisfied or not. These are the things that people most often answer that connect with those, right? So there are some times that in some situations in life it is just random or chaotic, and there is no connection, right? What my kid picks out, what Jack picks out to wear in the morning, who knows if he will even have two socks that match, and I can never guess what he's going to wear. When it comes to energy in your church, we have a hint by how people answer. We'll answer about how energized they are, and that's the one we have here. That's a hint. But when it comes to, like my daughter, Olivia, is much more deliberate, and I can more often guess what she will pick. She's a little older, and she has a sense of style that comes from her mother, right? So in this, as people answered questions about satisfaction being like, God is at work here, we're living into what God has called us to do and to be. When answering those questions, these are the ones that were most tightly tied to those responses. So,
What were all of our choices and responses? Strongly agree, somewhat disagree, strongly or somewhat disagree. We had all those choices. So 40% of the people all chose one of that very same answer on any one of these questions. It happened to be a year, right? 40 or more percent.
No. So if people in this church felt strongly and agreed with this top one in particular, if people answered thumbs up, that we feel persons who serve as leaders in our church are representative of the membership, if most of the people said yes, clear yes, your church would score very highly in satisfaction, right? That's your biggest lever. That's the biggest thing that people are in your church are most thoughtful or concerned about. When that's not happening, that's the biggest negative lever. When people are feeling that we're not being heard, or I don't have a voice representing me in the church leadership, that's going to be the biggest lever that would maybe energize or people would be more frustrated with the church. That's the biggest lever. So this would just be me saying these things are your church's DNA. It doesn't change, right? A pandemic tends to not change this list. So not good or bad, but it would tell me that in your church, to equip leaders and make sure leaders are having two-way conversation, for that to be happening is kind of what is needed to help you all thrive. Yep, you got it. So, if it's, I'm going to suggest that if it is a math thing, right? And I'm happy for the sake of let's not get stuck here. But my suggestion is this is the church's DNA, and we can unpack it more. But I would just offer this as guidance for you just to think about, here's our church. It's not good or bad, but you all think most often about leadership. The pastor is called to cast vision, and then working together and collaborating will be a positive thing in your church, right? So those are some elements that are the church's DNA. Let's keep going, and we can always come back, and I'm happy to stick around afterwards, but great questions, and drivers would be like the church's DNA. These do not change quickly. If you wanted to change them when you're feeling good, it typically takes about 7 years, right, to change a culture and these are not good or bad, right? But this is the church's DNA. I'm going to have us go to the next slide, and these were some statements. Just go ahead and put the full list up there. And here's how Jay Johnson summarized these drivers and some thoughts about them. You put a great deal of energy into how decisions are made and who makes those decisions. And by your vitality, by your lower energy and moderate satisfaction, it suggests there is a tension between the members and the leaders of the congregation. And so that it would benefit everybody, by leaders striving for consensus in decision making. So that's kind of taking a step back and saying, because leadership is such a big deal in your church, some of that two-way communication is crucial, and because attitude and how you navigate disagreement is contagious, for your leaders to get close to being on the same page would be a plus. Right? That's not true. Some churches I visit, so long as the preacher preaches and you've got a good pianist or organist, everything else can be a mess, and that's where they're focused. In your church, there's a pretty high focus on leadership, right? So these things would be more true. Let's go to the next slide and let's put all the bullets there. So J. Johnson, my supervisor, would suggest quite often that churches have some kind of like a quarterly town hall, but it's an opportunity for there to be good, honest, constructive two-way communication, right? It's not just the leaders in a room making decisions, but it's a good opportunity for there to be good two-way communication in the church, right? So if people are feeling like my voice in this church, if people are saying my voice is not being heard, how do we try to take steps so that it's a better two-way conversation? Sometimes when churches are so focused on leadership, it may seem like leaders are put up on a pedestal and it becomes a scary thing to become a leader. And so many people in a church that focuses on leadership so highly think, I don't either have the skills or the time or the energy to step into that role. So then it becomes important to make an on-ramp or make clear the process to build up leaders. So Jay would also say that trust in society is historically low, right? Institutional trust has gone away since about the 60s, and it just keeps going down. Changing your pastor. So Pastor Al, you've been here how long? Almost a year, right? And so because these are drivers, even before Pastor Al was here, these drivers of the DNA of your church existed before that. So, and he would say that, yeah, that conflict with leaders, right? You've changed a pastor, and Pastor Al is not the one who preceded him, and you've still got the focus on leaders. Thoughts or questions? I think most of you are still awake. Yes.
Communication there, like changing your message, simply mass issue, and will come with, communication help, like trust of the trustees, like financial groups. Is that what they're saying, or, they don't trust the committees that are making these decisions?
It would. The biggest thing in this church, the top driver on that page 1, is that persons who serve as leaders in our church are representative of the membership. So if there's a sense that my voice, my personal voice, is not being heard, or I don't know what's going on, that's when this church could get in trouble, right? Because that's the highest area of focus. And so if it's a sense that the leaders are making decisions secretly, and here's where I think you did take this during a pandemic. And, if you heard my message earlier, I would say leading a church through a pandemic is rough, right? So if you are a leader in this room, first, thank you. And also there's a place of strain with the church. You're going to come out of this, you're going to take a breath, take some steps about how to increase two-way communication, make it clearer how people can become leaders in this church. And maybe it's, communication about trustees or finances. That could be part of it. I don't know. But you can take some steps, and people will just take a breath, and you'll come out of this feeling even better, right? Over the next couple years, that could be some next steps.
I don't think any of the responses means that anybody in the church distrusts you as the trustees. That's not what it means. Or distrust the trustees. The issue is they want to be able to believe that their views are being heard without having to trust people.
Yeah. So when Jay Johnson was here, so I'm going back to the very first page. On the back side of the first page, you could see recommendations. And so this is what Jay recommended to the leaders here, and I'll just read these. In part, it begins to speak to what you're naming, the 4 points that he makes. And I'll just read these because if you're joining us online. So the first is this: increase two-way communication, giving opportunity for input and feedback. One way to accomplish this is consider quarterly congregational meetings where the board presents what the church work is going on, presents what it expects to work on in the next 3 months, and collects feedback and input from the congregation, right? So there could be any number of other channels that you have already been doing, and also for people to come and have the opportunity to flat ask and have a good conversation, right? That is one recommendation Jay made. The second is this: people in your church are unsure about how leaders are selected. This lack of clarity indicates a need to develop and communicate a clear process for becoming a leader in your church. As a highly educated congregation, you may consider what it would look like to develop a leadership academy for your congregation. So I can appreciate, I think in part through your mission statement, you have a sense of how you're looking to make disciples. How do disciples become leaders in this church? Right, so I visit some churches and they're like, how do you become a leader? My arm got twisted, or I couldn't say no to the person who called me. To be clear about how leaders are made would be a positive thing, right? And it just helps make a clear on-ramp to being a leader. If you want to be a leader, great. Here are some steps to take. Thank you for serving. The fourth piece here: reaffirm the mission, value, and direction of the congregation. You indicated to us you need to name and claim your identity as a church. So, that decisions as leaders and as a church become easier when you're clear on where God is calling you together, right? And that's prayer and purpose. That's what I preached on, right? Prayer and purpose instead of preferences and egos and all that. The last piece here: finally, you indicated a desire to be more connected to God and each other. This desire for connection indicates you need to explore what types of small groups people desire. Let me back up because we didn't get to that yet. We haven't gotten to that yet. I will have you look in your handout. I don't think we have a slide for this. We don't. Okay. So here on this is at the bottom says page 3. At the top it says priorities. And here you had the opportunity to rank and say how much more energy you wanted placed into 17 different areas in the life of the church. And on the right side is a mean. So people could have ranked, put a lot more energy, would have been a 5. Put no more energy into something would have been a 1. And so at the bottom of this list, people are saying we don't want to put more energy into this statement: enlarge or improve the physical facilities of the church to expand or enhance our ministries. It's not that people are thinking this is a bad church, right? You look around and this is a beautiful facility, and people are saying let's not pour a lot of money into it. Trustees, right? If you were thinking to add an addition on and do a building campaign, that is the dead last thing in this church right now. Let's look at the top ones, right? So your top 2 priorities here would be these 2 things. Make necessary changes to attract families with children and youth to our church. And number 2, develop and implement a comprehensive strategy to reach new people and incorporate them into the life of the church. Those are your top 2 priorities. You share those top 2 priorities with 97% of the churches that fill this out. You and every other church I visit, not every, but most every other church, want to reach new people. We want more young kids. Like, I got to sit over here this morning, and there was this wonderful young guy that wanted to be up here preaching. Maybe if you were here, you saw that. I tried to distract him during the Lord's Prayer by asking him about his fruit snacks, and I ran out of questions, so he came up. So I would say, don't lose track of that hope. I would suggest maybe some other places to get started. So over on the very left side, under the word first, you see the word average. Under second, you see average. But third are the words very high. So compared to the 3,500 other churches, you answered this as a priority that is significantly higher than most any other church. And this is one of the places where we're seeing that the pandemic has made an effect. And so here is where your church probably would benefit in the short term by putting more energy. And this is this. Create more opportunities for people to form meaningful relationships. For example, small groups, nurtured friendships, shared meals. Potlucks is what that says, right? I think before and after worship, no fewer than like 8 of you came up and said, we get to have a potluck. Which you have great food, but it's more than food. You missed each other, right? You missed each other. And so, for you, in the short term, like you're going to think about leaders and all that, and that's a longer term process and taking some steps there. An easy short-term win, find ways to get together that make sense to you in this time, right? You had a potluck, and praise God. It's good food. I was going to say I've had better food elsewhere. I don't know. It's good food. But, no, I was going to say it's not the food. It's not the food why you come to a potluck, right? You come for the people. And in this church, you all are really hungry, not for food, but for friendships. Right? The pandemic has caused isolation with that. Let me highlight one more thing here, and then we'll pause for questions. Going along the left side as well, there are just other things that are high and low, right? The third one here, or the fourth one says, provide more opportunities for Christian education and spiritual formation at every age and stage of life. That's pretty normal. Seventh, high. Here, again, people have more of a focus here, and this is pandemic related. I see this in a lot of churches. Deepen our sense of connection to God and one another through stronger worship services. The pandemic has messed with how you all worship, and you're indicating you missed that. So to take some steps and get back to any kind of new normal, right? I'm guessing 2 years ago you didn't have blue painter's tape in addition to all the rest of your decorations here. The blue painter's tape is like the physical distancing. That's, my jokes just get worse. So you had a question. Somebody over here had a question.
Oh, I was just going to mention potluck. My grandson said earlier today,
We need to do this every week. So it could be a potluck, or, so I'm trying to think, and I've seen churches do movie nights, just have fun in a way that makes sense to you all. And in here it says small groups, right? So maybe you used to do like UMW or small groups before the pandemic, and it's maybe finding a way to get back and be in person, right? Before the pandemic, I never did Zoom. I did a few other things, but Zoom is great, but it's real people. Like, I get to be with you all today. And that's, I feel sorry for the lady at Casey's that I chatted her ear off on the way here. It's like real people, and I'm an extrovert, and Zoom is okay, but it's real people. Anyway, so potlucks, movie night, just hang out, park party, softball. I saw one church had a pickleball tournament, right? You're like, what is pickleball? And I say, what is pickleball? Yeah. Other questions or comments? Yeah. Yeah, that's true. That eighth. Yeah. Yeah, that's true. So the statement or the observation here is about the eighth priority on this list of 17, eighth, and under that it says low. And the statement here considered is strengthen the process by which members are called and equipped for ministry and leadership. As I consider that, as you pointed out, it could be just a tension in this church, right? And people are saying, we're tired of talking about leaders. We're tired of people asking to be leaders. That could be. But leadership is a big deal here. So I would, that's a great observation, and I don't know why that would be the case here, and it probably is at tension with the work you're called to do. So that might tell me that people are like, to do the work you've got to do, there might not be enthusiasm to do it. So it'll energize folks. Where I would say in the near term getting started, relationships and worship are some good near-term goals. Would give you a boost of energy. Other questions, thoughts? We've been here an hour. Let me close, and I'm happy to stick around later. So the big things that I would take away from all of this so far is those drivers would be the DNA of the church, and in part, they would indicate your biggest levers. You've got some priorities here, and that's where we've got a sense that relationships, people are hungry for potlucks, but potlucks are relationships. And people are hungry for relationships, and to find a new way where you can worship together. Be in the presence of God and each other. Let's just hit the last few slides here. Keep going, let's go past, let's go right here. So satisfaction and energy were the first map, and we also got asked questions about theology and flexibility, and this is on your handout. The very back of the handout is where you can see where this is. All things considered, you're right in the middle when it comes to flexibility, right? If you were at the top, navigating the last 15, 16 months would have been a piece of cake. So this would tell me that you can make adjustments as you have opportunities and challenges, and there's going to be some pushback. Just as you continue to live life together as leaders, to take some steps, navigate, communicate, discern where you are, and take some next steps, that will only benefit you as a whole. Your dot is right of center when it comes to theology. This is not social or political. This is understanding the place of Jesus and the faith in the Bible. And so just outside the centrist part, but just leaning a bit conservative. You may say, sometimes I point to something like that and people say, but in this town, we are the liberal church in town. This is your dot compared to the 3,500 other churches around the country. Does that make sense? Theologically conservative. That just helped me think when I preach here, I probably should preach from the Bible and not do a book study from the pulpit. Question? Across denominations. Yep. And in Iowa, I see United Methodist churches all over that. We have those dots are all over the place, which makes life fun, right? Right? I never know what anyways, I will not chase as many rabbits now. Anyway, so theologically, a bit conservative, flexibility. You're able to adjust and adapt, and that's probably a strength because it's been hard work. And again, thank you to the leaders who are trying to navigate a time when it was not a choice whether or not to make decisions. You had decisions to make, and this would tell me they're not always the easiest. So keep after it, keep taking steps, adjusting. Let's keep going, and I'll just let's go to there'll be a brown slide that says what's next. So we'll keep going here. Keep going, keep going, keep going. I mean, we just hit that. Keep going, keep going, keep going. Keep going. Here we go. So figure out a best way to communicate this with the congregation. So that would have been in part inviting me here. You have the Jay's summary, and also you're welcome to distribute any part of this more widely. We recommend that you would begin quarterly meetings, but this is a recommendation. You all can decide how best to do that. Improve two-way communication. And just because we recommend something, I was at a church a while back, and they said, we tried these town hall meetings, and nobody showed up. And I can get it. So let's try something else, right? Try something, and to have that two-way communication is crucial. Add small groups to build relationships. Careful that they are not ideologically motivated groups, right? So you probably have a diversity of theology or social identities. People are hungry for relationships. I would add to that potlucks, right? I don't know about every week. That's a lot of food, right? This will be the church that gained weight the fastest in the state. Focus on mission, vision, values. For a church where leadership is a top driver, right? Your top two are leadership or governance, and the third one is pastor. You will thrive when you have a clearer sense of our common purpose. The clearer that is, and the more people are bought in, the easier decisions we'll make. And then Jay says, let's do this CAT again in 3 to 5 years, right? Your drivers wouldn't change, but chances are you will have taken some steps. Let me wrap this up. Some of you have been good sports, and I'll hang around later for questions too, but I kept my sermon short, and this part went long, so thank you for coming to this part. I'll close in prayer, and then we'll stop the live stream, but let me pray. Gracious God, I give you thanks for each person here, for their willingness to hear with curiosity. God, I pray that they would continue in a sense of discernment and openness to where, God, you would lead them, and openness to discerning your will for them, and also be inspired to take steps. God, I pray that you would give them encouragement, give them hope, give them faith and love, God, that they would live that life together that you have promised us as a community of faith, rooted in you. God, you are the vine, we are the branches, and you we have life. All this we pray in Jesus' name. Amen. New friends, thank you for coming out. I see the sun's peeking out, so I kept you in here and you avoided the rain. Have a good day. I'll stop my bad jokes. I'll stop. Thank you.